Good evening, y'all. It's Monday evening, a little after 6. So we'll go ahead and get started with our session today. Hope you had a good day. And start off and see if you have any questions. Any questions for us this evening? Okay. Well, I have a couple of questions, I guess, and observations. Uh, I think it is significant, although I don't know what it means yet, that Italy elected their first female prime minister, uh, and we'll see what happens with that. Uh, there is a major protesting in Iran for equal rights for women, and that is really picking up steam. So again, it's one of those things you will probably be seeing more of, hearing more about rather. Uh, this was one that I thought was very interesting. I try to look at things and see the creator in everything we do. And I was watching, I think it was CNN the other day. It might have been NBC. Uh, I was looking at, but it was a segment on about how because of the price of everything really, but especially home and rent prices in some of the larger cities, not only are people homeless that have never been homeless, but it is forcing people to move in together, to share space and make those type of accommodations. And I wonder. See, America has never been a community. We've never been a oneness kind of thing, and it's I just maybe see that as in its own way forcing people to share space and be a community with people that you normally would not be with. And I don't think that's coincidental. But any of those three things, any or questions on any of it,
I have a comment.
sir.
The lady in Italy is far right wing. She is attached to the Nazis in Italy, and
Uh-huh.
she's moving in the way of Hungary in terms of her racist attitudes. As far as Iran is concerned, there's an effort to actually mitigate the effects of theocracy there in Iran. And as far as the idea about rents and stuff, one of the most expensive places to live is in Greenville, and the other one is Anderson. I think Greenville is number 2 in the country in terms of rent increases, and Anderson is number 6. I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Any thoughts on that? I just see, I see, or I want to see anyway, uh, what I term to be magic, or a silver lining in things that we see, and without trying to shape it, I don't mind telling the universe uh, that this is an opportunity. So, uh, for an example, I don't know if you heard this. The Woman King, that there is a big movement to boycott it, and people are wanting to boycott it uh, because they're saying it's historically inaccurate. Uh, I see that as a good thing. For one, it pushed it to the top of the box office. It made people go out in groves to see it, and I think it's going to force people to look up the data, to look up history. Uh, I think it's shocking to people that a movie would be made like that about black women, African women. And not only that, they were saying how the creators of the film went out of their way to make sure that they got dark women, dark complexioned people. So I see that too as something positive. And so, what are your thoughts? Has anybody heard that, or something you easily could look up if you get a chance to look at it and see what you think? The one thing I could not get them to say, or I didn't hear them say, is who is pushing this. Uh, all she said was it was being the boycott is being led by a group of intellectual people. I don't quite know who or what that would be, but uh, I really would want to know what's behind the boycott. The other. So anyway, have you guys heard anything about that, or anybody heard anything differently, or?
Ron, this is Vermel. I was reading about that today too.
Uh huh.
I did find it rather interesting that there would be a group that's pushing back on it, but I can't help but feel as if that group doesn't want any more growth among blacks or brown people, people of not of particularly white color. But I couldn't find out where the group was that is pushing back. And the article went on to say that it's largely on Twitter. And so I'm not really familiar with how to look for it on Twitter.
I too. I thought that was intentionally vague. Who's doing the pushing back. I even thought that it may be even African people doing the pushing, but no, they didn't give any indication as to who was doing that. But I just thought it was interesting. Thank you. All right.
Who are pushing
Yes, sir.
against or African people, and I don't know what the total pushback is about, because everyone knows that if you're going to do something of that nature, you're going to have to take some liberties with history. The point of the matter is the story true? And whether or not the storyline can be followed,
Yeah.
That's the primary thing. So as far as the pushback is concerned, from the people who were in the movie, Viola Davis is pushing back against those who are saying that it should be boycotted. In terms of understanding the total reason behind it, I have no clue.
Yeah. But as I say, I don't at least think it's getting publicity, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think this is a bad thing, and that's how I'm going to look at it. To look at something like that and to be able to follow the history books even and talk about every little detail, every conversation, and everything that took place is impossible. So in any historical film, you take those type of liberties, but are you sticking to the facts? Are you, as Pastor said, is the story true? Can you poke holes in that part of it? So.
Well, Ron, if you're going to deal with every detail, it's not a movie. It's a documentary.
Yeah.
The entertainment value had to be there in terms of the costumes, etc., in order to make it what it is, a film, a movie. I mean, it's no different than was Black Panther. It was a movie, and it was the only truth in it was based upon the essence of Africans themselves during the times of the kingdoms of Africa and how they related to the rest of the world. But as far as the characters are concerned, of course they were fictional. And in the Woman King, the characters in the Woman King are based upon true warriors. So that's the primary difference in it. But that's it as far as I can see.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. I remember growing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. This is Kathy. I was just going to say I've only seen one interview that Viola Davis has done, and I think I was sharing with you and Pastor when you talked about the dark complexion of the warriors. She was saying, based on the historical facts of what she's learned about this, that the dark-skinned women were the ones that the tribes chose and kind of forced into this. That's the first time I've heard that, but she was saying they had a choice to either be to fight as warriors, or sometimes in some instances they were even killed. And I have not heard that anywhere else. She was doing that interview on The View, and they, of course, went into a whole nother direction with the conversation, and she didn't get to finish the point she was making, but I haven't heard that anywhere else. Has anyone else heard that?
No, and I when you told me that, I meant to research it, and I forgot about that. Yeah, I meant to look at that. Yeah. I was just going to say, and then we can move on after this, y'all. But I remember growing up seeing movies about westerns and Jesse James in particular, and him robbing trains to take care of the poor and feed his family, and he come from a farm, and you know the truth of the matter when I got old enough to really look at that and research that, Jesse James was after the Civil War when the South lost, and yeah, everybody's farm was devastated in the South, but he was credited with killing, I think, 21 men. It may have been more. Do you know the majority of those were unarmed ex-slaves that he would find and would kill? So his portrayal as a hero was extremely inaccurate. So when you talk about making movies, you can use someone's true name, and nothing about the movie has any accuracy at all. So that's just one of those things that make you kind of take a look and second guess things that you see when because people count on you not doing the research or not following up on things. So it's just one of those things that kind of always stuck with me. Okay, we can move on, y'all. Any other questions or comments? Okay. On yesterday, we were looking at Ecclesiastes, and we were talking about Solomon, and we were looking at his reign and a little history of his life, being the taking the throne after his father David, and the relationship that David had with God, and Solomon coming after his father and being the first one to build the temple. He had wisdom. He asked God for wisdom, and God granted him wisdom as reigning over the people. And we even talked about his wealth and how people come from all over the world to test him, see it on his wisdom. And we talked about his wives and his concubines. And afterwards, Pastor and I and Kathy were talking. We were looking at these numbers, and I was going to ask Pastor, because they had 700 wives and 300 concubines. and which comes to 1,000. And we looked at that a little further because we talked about that. Is Rainier on the line tonight? Yeah, I was hoping she was. Pastor, you want to, sir?
I'm still at work. It's 3 o'clock now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you want to come back to that later then?
That's up to you guys.
Well, just if you would please, what do you see there with those numbers? And maybe she can hear the recording later.
Okay. Well, when you look at numbers in the scriptures, one of the things you notice is that the numbers are usually round numbers, like 700, 300. How come it wasn't 702 concubines and 301 wives? It's just 700, 300. They're round numbers. And
bringing her backpack, buddy.
I beg your pardon?
Sorry,
Someone say something?
I was not muted. Sorry.
They're round numbers. And when we look at 1,000, 1,000 speaks to something that's foundational, something that's solid or grounded. And if we look at the number 7, it speaks to, or talks towards, alludes to the completion of the material world. And the 303 looks at the completion of the creator or divine completion. And both of those added together are 1,000. And to me, what I saw in that is the idea of Solomon's foundation being set in his Solomon being grounded rather in the world of divinity as well as the material world. And when we look at the both of them and how he related to them, what we see is a tug of war, a struggle between those two worlds, and him making the landing in one of the two. And we find that in his old age, he looked back at the struggles that he had internally in terms of the divine, the world of divinity and that of materialism, and began to see the mistakes that he made and share them with us so that we and ourselves can make our decisions in terms of our journey based upon some of the mistakes that he made so that we can avoid them. So I see that as very pertinent, dealing more with the feminine energy in both of the worlds, that of the material world and that of the spiritual world. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, y'all? Questions or comments? Okay. I see something in this as well, and I don't know. I always wondered if Adam had any idea where he was, and I mean from his spiritual nature, the fulfillment that he was seeking, he was already there. And it almost seems like the same thing with Solomon here. It seems like any extreme, whether it's darkness or enlightenment, is hard to maintain. And I guess that's his writings here almost kind of support that. As Pastor said, he looks back at his life and talks about his mistakes. But anyway, we'll move on. Let's see. We stopped on last evening yesterday morning rather, in chapter 5. And I want to read part of this and see what you guys think here. I'm going to pick up in verse 10 and read down a ways and see what we have here. It says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. What good things increases, those who consume them increases. When good things increases, those who consume them increases. So what is the advantage to their owner except to look on? The sleep of a working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of a rich man does not allow him to sleep. There is a grievous evil which I have seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. When those riches were lost, though through a bad investment, he did not, and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. And he had come naked from his mother's womb, so will he return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. And I agree. A lot of this, it sounds like he's talking about himself. What do you guys think of this? What do you see here?
Ron, this is Ramel. For me,
Yes, ma'am.
Ecclesiastic seems to be, King Solomon is reflecting on his life and assessing all the human desires as being vanity. It gained him nothing. However, I feel like it's everyone's journey, and they go through those same things in their journey to seeking the Creator and understanding who we are really in this world. I feel like it hits everything: money, possessions, intellect, everything. None of that really matters. I feel like Solomon is saying, aside from knowing who you are. And I think he's really well. That's my thought on it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. He touches on a little bit of everything here.
He's also talking about those who love money is no different than those who are hungry. If you are always hungry, if you love money, it's a hunger for money, and you can't eat it. It's never filling. If you're hungry for food, you eat it, you can get full. But if you're hungry for money, it never fills you up. It never gets you to a place of satisfaction. It actually makes you more selfish, but it also does something else. It also increases those around you who are seeking to get something from you. So it has a tendency also not only to make you selfish and at the same time increase your greed, but it causes you to lose sight of who you are, because whatever you have this strong affection for, that is the thing that you will be focused on. And with that focus being on monetary gain or material gain, you lose sight not only of who you are, but whose you are, as well as you lose sight of what a benefit you were created to be or can be to humanity itself. Thank
you. I think the other thing to me that some of the observations he made talk about things that separate people. There is no sense of community here, and he keeps saying the riches that God gives a man. And I know that the Creator allows us to walk our journey. But I wonder if he thinks, if he looking at this as the money being a particular type of blessing that not everyone seems to have or have the privilege of gaining from the Creator. So again, it kind of speaks of separation to me in his thinking.
I don't quite understand what you mean by that, Ron.
Okay, look at there. Look at chapter. Look at chapter 6. He said this once before. I'm trying to find the first place he said it, when God gives riches to a man. But in chapter 2, there's the evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of that he desires. But God has not empowered him to eat from them. For a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. He talks a lot about riches to me, and I know he's talking about himself, but it just kind of I guess I don't see the linking or him seeing other people other than talking about himself. I guess he does talk about the poor later, but I think there's a lot here about him and that separation, and because it almost sounds to me like the riches was a gift that not everyone has a privilege of having, and that comes from God, and that to me is a separation. I just don't see everything that he's saying or agree, I guess.
Honestly, the overall thing I see with Solomon, without having to go verse by verse, is that if we look at Solomon as a man, that's one thing. But if we look at Solomon as a spiritual principle, that's another thing. Because if we look at Solomon as a spiritual principle, we are looking at Solomon actually compare the wealth of a man and a pauper. We talked about the wealth of a man and a pauper. It depends on, the only difference between the two is how they utilize what they have. It is not a sin to be a wealthy man. It is how you utilize it. And he also talks about how if you are one who labors, who toils in the ground in order to make your living, then you don't have any people coming after you, and you have to lay awake at night being concerned about who's going to take your wealth away from you, because you're only harvesting enough to take care of your family. However, if you have stockpiles, then you lay awake at night concerned about is someone going to take it away from you or someone going to get over on you, as opposed to having the attitude that this, what I have, belongs to everyone, not just me. I think that we will lose a lot, and we do lose a lot when we see, especially those characters of the Old Testament, as being people as opposed to representing the principles. Solomon represents several different principles as I see it. I see Solomon representing the principle of not only wealth and that of a pauper, but also the wisdom of this world, as well as the wisdom of the spiritual realm, as also the relationship with this material world and the relationship with the spiritual world. And I see that in contrast also. I see that Solomon speaks to or gives us the idea of we have to be cognizant of, be aware of who we are, so we are able to balance the life of the spiritual as well as the material. We cannot be so spiritual until we lose sight of the material world itself, and we can't be so greedy for the material world until we lose sight of the spiritual. The material world is here for a purpose, and the purpose of the material world is to sustain us materially, as well as to be a catalyst to teach us how to be spiritually balanced. If we get so caught up in this material world, we lose our sense of spiritual balance, which means that we lose our sense of humanity. When we are balanced with the spiritual and material world, then we are human, because we see the material world as an asset to the material body, but we also see the spiritual world as a manager of the material world, so as to keep it in a place of balance. I hope all that makes sense. Thank you.
I have a comment. This is Evelyn. God doesn't give us things. And it took me to get old to realize that. And that's why I don't believe we should be praying for physical things, because we get things because we work for it. And then, some get it because they steal it. But what I'm saying is, God doesn't give us money. He doesn't give us things. The only God that give us things is us. And again, it took me a while to realize that. So I stopped praying for physical things, tangible things, because I know that God's not going to give it to me, the God that we were taught. I'm the one who get those things. I'm the one who go out and work and go and buy those things. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that comment.
I'm
done.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Pastor. And part of what you just said is what I was getting at. If you look at chapter 5 and in 19, and I understand what the pastor's saying about the concept. Chapter 5, verse 19 says, "Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered." That's what. If you look at his life, he had a heavy tax on the people. It was a heavy burden on the people. So part of his wealth was him being a burden to the people. So I that's the part I didn't agree with when he says when God gives you wealth, he is no different than anybody who has stealed something or taken stuff from people, from the poor. So that's the part that I kept thinking about, that you're saying, he keeps saying that God gave him this, and that is the mindset of a lot of people. This is a gift. This is my blessing. This is something that God gave me or allowed me to do it, and that to me is one of the flaws in his argument. But that's just. But I agree with what Pastor's saying. I to see this as these as principles. But going back, I just did some reading ahead and to look at his life a little bit. So that in the beginning of all this, he says, "I did this, I did that," and really he ended up starting off well, but he becomes a heavy burden on those who sat under him. And that.
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ron. Go ahead. I yield.
I forgot what I was going to say, but I was just saying. Excuse me. I was going back to the original comment. It seems like when a man lives in that type of extreme, it is hard for him to see creation. It is hard for him to stay humble.
So was Solomon, was he not was he unbalanced when he had all these feminine concepts? Because yeah, that's my question. Did he have balance at that time to have the concubines and the wives?
Pastor, you want to speak to that, please?
Yes. Again, we're not talking about a man with wives and concubines. We're talking about a man who is torn between two worlds. About Evelyn, we're talking about Ron. We're talking about men, period. We're talking about people. We're talking about the principles of humans, of people who are to become human. We are talking about a principle that's telling us how to govern ourselves and how to avoid the pitfalls of being too caught up in the material world, or thinking that we are more than we are in the spiritual world. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about an individual man as much as we're talking about the principles that the man is writing about.
Well, I got that part, Pastor. What I'm saying, I know everything we're talking about is concepts. But if you think too much of something, if you think or be into something too much of anything is not good for you. So that was my question. So the thoughts, the concepts that he was having, the thoughts, and I'm saying this with the feminine energy, the wives and the concubines, was he not unbalanced continually with those thoughts or the concepts? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
The question becomes this. If the concubines are representative of feminine energy, are the concubines legitimate? Or are they righteous in this relationship? And if the 300 wives are spiritual energy, feminine energy, then are they legitimate? Or are they are righteous in nature, the energy itself? What message is he giving us in regards to the concubines and the wives? What is he saying about them by virtue of the numbers that's being used here? To me, it seems as though Solomon is equally grounded in the spiritual aspects of the feminine energy as well as he is in the unrighteous aspects of feminine energy in this earth realm. I see Solomon as being every one of us caught up in a world trying to find balance itself and struggling within to find it. That's how I see it. I may be wrong. I may be overlooking or not seeing the clarity. However, when I think of how come it did not say that he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, what does a concubine represent in the scriptures? What does a wife represent in the scriptures? Does that word wife, is it wives or is it Isha? Or is the concubines, or are they women who were taken from different cultures and they were treated as objects as opposed to having intimate relationships with them in a righteous way? You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I never looked at it that way, and I know it's more to the story than what we see on the pages. But yeah, that makes sense. And I always wonder, how can one man, have all them women in his life, and he up there trying to fight a war? I always said that he'll never go to sleep. But anyway, I appreciate you explaining that to me.
That is exactly why it does not represent individual women. It represents concepts. And the numbers attached to those concepts tells us what they mean or give us some kind of insight into what it's talking about. We have extreme difficulty in releasing from those things because they are so ingrained in us. And our way of thinking is so literal, and we are just now getting to a place where we are able to process spiritually as opposed to looking at things literal as we have been taught. And that is why we have to dig so deeply in them and look at them more than one time. I also think that once it will be just like pretty much everything else we've talked about. Once we talked about Abraham and we talked about his sons, and then when we talked about the 10 utterances, what we did, as we spoke of them in part, at the end, what happened, we pulled it all together and saw an overview of what all of it meant. And with Solomon, it's much more complicated, but that is pretty much the same approach that we are going to have to take. And the reason I say it's much more complicated is because it digs so deeply into the personalities of humans, or those who would be humans anyway. And, I mean, think about it. Solomon talks about everything from wealth to illegitimate relationships. When I say illegitimate, I'm not talking about bastardizing. I'm talking about relationships that's not based upon love and lust. He talks about the difference between being rich and poor. He talks about the way you make your living, whether you're a farmer or whether you're a wise man obtaining money in other ways. He talks about so many different things, and everything that he speaks of, he contrasts them. And that's what makes it such a complicated principle to understand, because if we really read Solomon, he's dealing with every aspect of the life of a man in this earth. At least that's how I see it. Thank you.
I agree with you. He covers everything.
So why?
Any other? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just going to ask a question. So why do you think that it is so imperative for us to look at this now? Why is it being brought to us at this stage of our lives, at this point of our journey? Why? That's not rhetorical.
Hey, Ralph, this patches that we in now, it makes you examine yourself and look at yourself more.
It does. Sure, you're right, Charles. Anyone else?
Well, as you have said, this speaks to every human imagination. This speaks to this, regardless that this was written hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. This talks about the heart and the mind and the soul of a man. So that never changes. So I guess it is something that, as we move through this and be cognizant of, is something we need to be totally aware of.
I believe that all of the books of that are considered books of holiness are books that are separated for specific purposes are very, very in tune to man, regardless of the age that man lives in. It's like laying doing an outline and filling in that outline and saying to man that regardless of how you develop in this earth, you will never be able to escape these parameters. You're either going to travel a journey that's going to bring you to the place where you become what you were created to be, or you're going to continuously struggle. There will be conflict and chaos for the rest of your life in this earth. And I don't mean the individual life. I'm talking about for the whole time that mankind is in this earth realm. There are always going to be problems until man develops an understanding of who it is. There is no escaping what Solomon writes about. There's no escaping what's written about Abraham or no one else. I see this no differently than I see the world today. If you look at what Solomon is talking about, if you look at what Abraham spoke about, if you look at what Moses spoke about, any of them, if you look at what Jesus taught, you see every bit of it in this earth today. And you saw it yesterday, and you saw it 50 years ago, and you saw it 100 years ago. The only difference is that we've not paid it that much of attention. And we are going to be continuously repeating what we are seeing in these scriptures until they are corrected, until we are embraced on a broad basis the essence of who we are. We talked a moment ago about the Roman king, and we talked about Black Panther, and we talked about the woman who's elected in Italy, and we talked about we've spoken rather of the antics of a Donald Trump and the ignorance of a Mitch McConnell and the conniving of a Matt Gaetz or McCarthy. All of these things. Now you think about all the people of whom I've spoken just now, and you can take every one of their personalities, all their antics, all their desires, and fit it right in this stuff talking about Solomon, Abraham, Moses, any of them. What I'm saying is this. Chaos is chaos regardless of the age you live in and regardless of the personality you attach to it. And our purpose for being into the earth is to bring order to this chaos. And the order that is to be brought to the chaos cannot be brought if we don't see these things figuratively. If we see them, when we see them literally, it confines us to see them as a person. However, and when I say person, I'm not just talking about the person Solomon, but I'm also talking about the person of a McConnell, or the person of a Trump, or the person of a Biden, or the person of a Ron or a James. When we look at it and see it of the broader sense of it, we begin to see the principles ingrained in it, as opposed to seeing it literally. Things do not change when we look at them literally. Things only begin to change when we see them as principles. And the reason the principles change is because they allow us to come to a realization and understanding and give us the strength to embrace what's actually being said. So what is being said here? What is being said here carries us all the way back to the garden, when we talked about functionality and dysfunctionality. When you read what Solomon is talking about, he's talking about the functionality of the divine entity, of the divine man, and he's also talking about the dysfunctionality of the man who is focused on the material world. And he's talking about the balance of divinity and materialism when he speaks of when you alludes to the way that wealth and that should be distributed and way it should be seen. When he points out the mistakes he's made, what he's talking about are those things that he did that led him away from the embracing of the nature of the principles that he knew he should have embraced. Every one of us have gone through this and are going through it. So the simplicity of it is, are we going to be functional or are we not? Now, how do we be functional? The way we be functional is through loving kindness, through mercy, through the expression and embracing of who we are and not being led astray by what our eyes see. Dysfunctionality is always available. The question is whether or not we're going to embrace it. The principles of greed, the principles of manipulation, the principles of governmental interference that will cause us to remain in bondage. All of these are principles of dysfunctionality, and changing dysfunctionality doesn't come by by passing a bill or expecting someone to be elected to office. Dysfunctionality only ends when functionality shows it how to be functional. Changing the hearts and minds of men is simply changing something from being dysfunctional to becoming functional. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, it makes sense.
Any questions or comments about that? Because I want to go further.
This is
So,
Vermel.
Pastor, I have one more question. I'm sorry, V. Go ahead. I yield.
No, go ahead.
So, thank you. So, what does it mean when it says the Songs of Solomon? Am I saying that right?
It's nothing but the Songs of Solomon. It's just the title of the book that somebody gave it.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Vermel. So Solomon, what we're reading about and gleaming from it, does that tie into another part of the scripture where it talks about for a rich man to go through the eye of the needle versus a poor man, something like that? It's tough.
And that doesn't talk about a rich man going through a camel going through the eye of the needle and a rich man to get into heaven, that kind of thing. That speaks to something different than that. I do remember reading what it actually saying, but I just remember it now. Everything, Vermel, relates to everything that's in the Scripture. The Scripture is repetitive. It speaks of the same things over and over again.
Okay.
So am I saying that it does relate to it? Yes, I am, because everything is interconnected in the Scriptures. All I'm trying to say is this. All I'm trying to say is that I find it difficult to refrain from taking an academic approach to the Scriptures when I'm studying or when I'm trying to understand it, and that is because I am accustomed to approaching things academically. So I have to record. I step back from it and ask myself, what is this actually saying in relationship to what took place in what is called the garden? It's what is called this place where things are being decided, where minds are being made up, where principles are being established. What does it mean in regards to that? And when I step back and take that approach, then I am better able to see the spiritual connotations that are involved there, as opposed to looking at it academically and looking at it from a governmental / historical / religious point of view. It gives me a better opportunity to see it spiritually. And when I see it spiritually, I see the principles of Solomon no differently than I see the principles of Jesus. I see when Jesus said to the man that he was to sell everything he had and follow him, that is no different than speaking in regards to his affinity for material things versus his affinity for spiritual things. The same principle that Solomon is talking about in these writings. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. It really does.
We are in this earth to learn about who we are, so that we can, what we call, put it in the macro, so that we are able to bring about change in the earth. The change that we are looking for is already in the earth. It's manifested right before our eyes. And the manifestation of it is an ebb and a flow. And the reason it is an ebb and flow is because we ebb and flow. We ebb and flow with believing that we see it, believing it's taking place, and waiting for it to take place. When we learn how to become consistent with knowing that the change is here, is before our eyes, then there won't be an ebb and flow as we see it now. What do I see as the ebb and flow? I see a manifested change with everything being exposed, and I see people moving in a direction to make it better for everyone. And then the ebb is when we like, well, it seems like nothing is going to change because it seems like things are getting worse. Then those manifestations we become blind to those manifested changes, because now what we're seeing is another problem as opposed to seeing another change. Does that make sense? And I'm trying my best to explain what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing. Does that make sense? If not, please ask your question. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Scott, that makes sense. I'm understanding it more, what you're talking about.
Thank you. Is anyone else?
I agree with Evelyn. I'm beginning to understand it more and not try to view it, like you said, from an academic or a story history perspective.
Are there others who are beginning to see it or not? Please just talk to me.
I'm still trying to absorb it. I'm
Okay.
still trying to
That's fair.
pull it. You're saying it.
Ron?
I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Is it making sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense.
Yeah, I honestly believe that we're at a very precarious time right now. I really do. And when I read about the lady in Italy, it struck me. Why now? And I just left it alone. And now, what I see in regards to that is that her being her thoughts being along the line of Nazis and racism, that is different than what's happening in Hungary, and that is no different than what happened with Mussolini, and that is no different than what happened with the Catholic Church. The period of, would you mute your phone, please, or check to make sure they're muted? You please make mute it. Thank you. That is no different than what was happening during that period of time. So what I'm saying is this: everything that we see that raises its head is the Creator is saying to us, this is the change you've been looking for. How are you going to approach it? How are you going to deal with it? What are you going to do with it? Are you going to see it as something, as another obstacle, or are you going to see it as change itself? Not an opportunity for change, but as change itself. Why do I say that? Because if things like that do not happen, if it doesn't happen, then people's minds are not pricked. Their hearts are not pricked. If you don't see, if we talk about how, let me give you an example. If we talk about how people are being lynched, that is a story that people hear, and that is something they may read about. However, if they see people being lynched, if they see it with their eyes, if they know someone who's been lynched, then it affects them differently. And how does it affect them differently? They have a desire for things to be different. And the desire for things to be different is the change that we are talking about. That's the change that's being manifested, the difference in the hearts of men. But that difference in the hearts of men is not realized as long as it does not have a personal, deep effect on those whose hearts should be changed. And when we look at someone who's making an effort to take Social Security away from people, now the hearts of people are changed and saying, how dare you do that? So now their hearts are changed, and what's happening is we see the change being manifested that's going to keep that Social Security from being taken away from people who needs it the most. Does that make sense?
I see it and understand it now, Rev.
This is the change that we see. Thank you, Sean. This is what this is what I'm talking about. This is the change that we embrace. It is not we don't focus on Scott trying to take the Social Security. We focus on the change that has come as a result of that, and that's the change that results in balance. Am I being confusing, or am I making sense to you guys?
You making sense to me now.
Anybody
Making
else?
sense.
Say again?
Making sense.
Thank you. So when we look at when we look at be it Solomon or anyone else, this is what we're talking about. When Jesus said to the disciples, the apostles, when he said to them that they were to go out and teach, they were to go out and espouse what they had learned. Why was he telling them that? He was telling them that because when they go out and espouse what they had learned, then they were going to expose those things that were unrighteous. And when those things that were unrighteous were exposed, the things that they were espousing, people would begin to embrace them, and that in itself is the change. Can you see that? And the reason we have not seen change is because the church has not espoused that. The church has espoused survival of itself. It has talked about a by and by, not a now and now. It has talked about when you leave this body and go to a place called heaven. It's not talking about the domination that we have in this earth in terms of being the change that is necessary. It always talks about change when Jesus come back. Come back from where? He never left. So we have to change that mindset so that we can see everything through the eye of manifested change. Thank you.
Well, Pastor, I think the reason why we haven't been realizing that things have changed is because, like you said, we've been looking at it with our eyes and not the eye. So, yeah, there's a bigger picture. And we have distractions, things that throw us off. But the minute we start looking through the eye, then we could really see the change. We embrace the change. I'm finished.
Evelyn, when we think about it, we are the distraction that we're looking at. Look, Pat, let me share what I'm saying. We are so accustomed to getting caught up or getting thrown off track until when something out of the ordinary happens, we look at it, we focus on it. That's the distraction. We have to teach ourselves not to get thrown off a track, regardless of whether we are caught off guard or not. We have to teach ourselves, you know what, I'm not going down that road immediately, as opposed to have to call someone to talk about it or wait until the next day to deal with it. How do we teach ourselves that? By talking to ourselves. If someone says something to you that is adverse to what you're thinking, and you tell yourself, I'm not going there. And then something else happens, and you have to do the same thing over and over again. And that in itself is bringing about change, the manifest change for you. And if we cannot see the manifested change in ourselves, we definitely won't see the manifested change in the earth itself. Does that make sense?
It does, but isn't that our frenemies? Those thoughts that come?
But the thoughts that come to be controlled by us. You don't think the way you thought 10 years ago, do you?
No,
Why?
sir.
Because you have trained yourself to think differently, right?
Yes.
So this is a continuous process. All I'm trying to say is this. The more we talk to ourselves about manifested change that we see, the more we are going to be able to experience it. The more we talk about how bad things are, the less we're going to experience manifested change. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Not just you, thank you, Evelyn, but not just you and Charles, but does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense.
Yes.
Yes.
Are there any questions or comments about this? And I'm sure that this is probably not the direction that we were going in, because I didn't even know where we were going, to be honest with you. However, I do feel like that we definitely need to be more cognizant of the change that we manifest within. And when we are more cognizant of the change that we manifest within, then we're more apt to see with our eye, because we're seeing from within as opposed to from without. I'm done. Thank you. Ron.
Okay. I think the way you summed it all up really kind of caps it all off. The looking at this, the whole thing conceptually and how it relates to us. I think that is a greater value than going down it line by line and skipping verses and picking out pieces. So, is there any portion of this that someone specifically wants to talk about? Okay. Well, maybe it's a good time to close then and kind of ponder what has been said. Oh, if there are no other thoughts or questions, let's call it an evening. And I hope everybody has a good week and look forward to Saturday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.